the kind of the representative of Condoleezza Rice, actually arguing that Palestinians must live in American-style suburbs, and what could better fit the American kind of ideology of civilizing the Middle East into a middle-class society than having, refugees or poor people living in American-style suburbs. So architecture was seen as part of a kind of a civilizing mission in the area. There was another rather strange and funny kind of proposal by Muhammad El-Abar. He's a very wealthy Arab from Dubai who is in charge of a big sort of building conglomerate called Nakhil, who are building all these archipelagos, or a lot of the archipelagos and other wild property developments in Dubai these days. And in fact, he is the one who plays the equivalent of Donald Trump in the Al Arabiya version of The Apprentice, if you know what that is. So a kind of, like the symbol of kind of, real estate capitalism, who in fact said, I want all these settlements, all that block here, I want to keep all the fence and all the security. It's perfect because that beach is the best beach in the Mediterranean, and build a series of big casinos and hotels and make them remain as an enclave, cut away and still taken away from the Palestinians. And he thought that the miserable $36 million that he offered would cover for Palestinian grievances of taking this land again from them. So in fact, this is kind of the environment we had to operate in, a kind of absolutely unimaginative, a kind of stale architectural proposal where in fact we had to open up first of all history. And I'll be just very brief. When you look at the fate of colonial architecture at post-colonial periods, you have roughly, everything is much more complicated than that, 3 scenarios. The first one, and the most common one, is the post-colonial nation, say in Uganda, India, Southeast Asia, etc., is using the infrastructure and building from the colonial period in exactly the same way they were built to perform. Right? So the prisons stay prison, the military stays military, the palace is palace, the villas is villas. And there is a kind of a reproduction of spatial hierarchies in space. No? Space itself, the way you occupy it, reproduces colonial power, right? Again. There's another option, which is sometimes happening, where there's a complete erasure, a kind of a tabula rasa approach that is happening there, and then you have a kind of always together with images, with imagination of a kind of a sort of a rural utopia that sometimes is standing at the ideological foundations of nationalist resistance to colonial period. But the most interesting examples are actually those where things are not used in the very same way, when things are actually transformed. That is an image that I had to show you before. But even in so we were showing them various types of squatting, of architecture, and transgression of the order, where particular palaces were occupied by, as in the case of a South African tribe, was taken over an apartheid building and actually spatialized itself within it in a very sort of interesting manner for us. So we were thinking that is a beginning to think about it, not to use them in the very same way that have been designed to produce, but to kind of to turn around their function. So this is all the discussion was around that kind of like simple suburban. And what we have been able to do finally is to grab three isolated settlements, Morag, Kfar Darom, and Netzarim. They were what so-called isolated settlement from the Israeli point of view. They were not in the blocks, in the main blocks of settlement, but they were quite close to Palestinian-built fabric, no? And we were turning them into various sorts of public institutions. The challenge was how to spatialize a set of public functions into the repetitive, emptied out shells of suburban homes. How a suburb could function as something else. How on the case of Kfar Darom, it has become a clinic, or we proposed a clinic to inhabit the homes of the suburb. In Morag, it was an agricultural school, so quite mundane function, while in Etzarim it was supposed to be a cultural center where we thought to actually collect the archive of NGOs and testimonies that were produced throughout the occupation and put them in the buildings themselves. So at that stage, it was a rather kind of a project of imposing various other programs on the existing settlements, but in fact, we saved those free.
This proposal was backed by who, politically?
This was done for the Palestinian Ministry of Planning. And in fact, their interest was to keep for the public those zones. We had to put something on the table so that these things would not be privatized. We failed in most cases. With 3 cases, we actually succeeded. Today, I received images from them. I could show you, but I haven't been able to put them into the PowerPoint. Of simple kind of program that have been inserted. As you know, though, the fate of the settlement were much less optimistic than what we thought. I mean, we thought Israel would leave them intact. But either responding to its own destructive drive or in fact doing it so that the settlers would not come back, Israeli army has destroyed itself, the settlement home, and I'd let you kind of indulge with a few images of that destruction. I think that it is quite a kind of a strange reference that Charles Jenks, as you know, announced the end of modernism with the first destruction of the housing estate in St. Louis, Purguit, right? And I don't know if what we see here, that kind of images that are simultaneously heartbreaking but somehow inspiring as well, the destruction of suburbia is not something that would allow us to kind of to rethink beyond it, no? Even though we're talking about something that is extremely specific in the context of the occupation, but you see like suburban homes being destroyed, and there is no, I have to say that there is some kind of optimism as well in those images, although as I will show you,
can these houses transform that another people live in?
Yeah, as I will show you later, there is an option. Obviously, Israel did not want it for the reason that I mentioned before, right? But what happened there was a complete environmental catastrophe. As you know, architecture is a solid waste, no? Solid toxic materials. And when these were destroyed, all these toxic elements were actually released into the ground and were kind of poisoned the little water that was there in Gaza. There were about 3,000 buildings destroyed, and thousands and thousands of tons, I don't find it here, of waste that were created in it. And I remember as well kind of just this very kind of apocalyptic images of at the ground of the destruction of that suburbia, like thousands of stray cats, cats that live in suburbs that were kind of left over the ruins to starve and to die of hunger and thirst. In a strange way, one of the kind of the things that have finally happened with the rubble from this settlement is that it was collected all together and thrown by Palestinian, wheeled in fact into the Mediterranean to form a huge jetty, a huge wave breaker that in fact would mark out the location where the deep seaport of Gaza will be when Israel will give it security clearance, which is nowhere near. So now it's just like a strange kind of land art or bizarre project that has as well kind of rendered the water of Gaza extremely toxic. So 40 years remnants of Israeli occupation have been wheeled into the sea to form that wave breaker. These are some images of kind of Palestinian sitting on this kind of ground zero level of the destruction of these suburbs. And in fact, this is where the new project begins. It is done together,